Please pray with me. Spirit of wisdom, of love, of justice, minister to us, your people. May only truth be spoken and may only truth be heard, we ask. Amen. One of my favorite magazines is The Atlantic. It's, I think, the longest running magazine in the United States, started by some of the framers of the Constitution, so that goes back a while. And it's scholarly and factual and very informative. The cover article 2 editions ago was on the nuclear family and how that's not working so well because children need more than 2 parents, and many only have 1. And the article in this last edition is, the cover article is The Anxious Child and the Crisis of Modern Parenting. Imagine for a moment that the future is going to be even more stressful than the present. I mean, maybe we don't need to imagine it. Many people probably believe this will be so. So it's sobering to realize that since the 1990s, the middle of the 1990s, our children have already been getting more and more stressed than at any other time since we've been recording these things. Now, it's ironic because no children have received more attention than children who've been born since the mid-1990s, but they're getting more stressed all the time, and their parents are getting stressed with them. The rates of adolescent depression from the mid-90s started rising and has risen ever since. Suicides have overtaken homicides as the second most common cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds, with only accidents being higher. In the United States, the children's emergency room visits for suicides attempts have risen from 600,000 in a year in 2007 to 1.1 million in 2015. And 43% of these visits around attempted suicide and suicide ideation, children planning on how they will kill themselves. 43% of these visits were with children younger than 11 years of age. Very sobering. And in London, both Fanshawe College and Western have doubled the amount of therapists on staff to meet the demands of their students. And they do a great job. But researchers are trying to figure out how we can flatten the curve. We know that term now, flatten the curve of anxiety in society and start things moving back in the other direction to more historical norms. I mean, it's not that in the past we haven't had things to worry about. A friend of mine sent me a reflection that reminds us of what our grandparents and great-grandparents went through. It offers some perspective. Imagine you were born in 1900. On your 14th birthday, World War I starts and ends on your 18th birthday. 22 million people perish in that war. Later in the same year, a Spanish flu epidemic hits the planet and runs until your 20th birthday, killing 50 million people in those 2 years. 50 million in 2 years. On your 29th birthday, the Great Depression begins. Unemployment hits 25%, and the world GDP drops 27%. And that goes on until you're 33. And the country nearly collapses along with the world economy. When you turn 39, the Second World War breaks out. You aren't even over the hill yet, and don't try to catch your breath. On your 41st birthday, the United States is fully pulled into World War II, and between your 39th and 45th birthday, 75 million people perish in the war. Smallpox was an epidemic until you're in your 40s, as it has killed 300 million people during your lifetime. At 50, the Korean War starts, 5 million more people perish. From your birth until you are 55, you've dwelt with the fear of polio epidemics each summer. You experience friends and family contracting polio and being paralyzed or dying. At 55, the Vietnam War begins and doesn't end for 20 years. 4 million people perish in that conflict. During the Cold War, you lived every day with the fear of nuclear war. On your 62nd birthday, there is the Cuban Missile Crisis, a tipping point where life on our planet as we know it feels like it could come to an end. And when you turn 75, the Vietnam War finally ends. How's that for a lifetime of facing challenges? I mean, I'm just blown away by the generations that went through all that. People have always had to worry about things, particularly worry about evil in all its forms and worry about natural disasters. Now, we know that greed and money and power has been a part of every empire, including the American empire. But it's on full display today as a psychotic president who flaunts this fact instead of hiding it. We see the real underbelly of empire in the Trump presidency. Evil in its more insidious and systemic forms is also becoming unmasked as we discover that our economic systems are a death engine to Mother Earth and ourselves, as global warming and the destruction of our soil, water, and air compromises our ability to exist. And we see how evil can take us over individually. We all know that we can lose ourselves to powers of addiction. We can lose ourselves to powers of pain and fear and anger that can erupt in, well, acts of violence like the 22 people killed in Nova Scotia. Turns out he was an angry, violent man who beat up his partner many times. And unfortunately, the RCMP didn't respond. Their neighbor called the RCMP and they said, you need collaboration before we can come. In fact, when the neighbors moved in next door, that man actually showed them weapons that they knew were restricted because they were military people and he was looking for ammunition for them, and they told the RCMP and it wasn't followed up. But evil can take us over. And evil is something, therefore, we have to be aware of and be careful not to fall into. It visits us. And there's always the temptation for pain to move us from hope to despair and from love to revenge. The other thing humans have always had to worry about are natural disasters, what we used to call acts of God. Until we figured out that if God had the power to cause floods and pandemics, then God must have the power to stop them. And since God doesn't stop them, God either does not exist or is evil or doesn't have that power. Science has helped us to figure out how pandemics and floods and earthquakes and forest fires happen. And true spirituality needs science to keep it honest about the reality, the nature of reality in God. Just as good science needs a robust spirituality to discern what is ethical and meaningful. Religion often makes the mistake of inventing a God and imbuing it with a power that it doesn't have, a power that religion says belongs to its tribe. And so if we do this, if we come together with our God, we'll be more powerful than the other tribes with their inferior gods. And there's a lot of that in the Bible too. We think of players in a championship game with players on each team praying to their God that God will help them win. Now, the people in Athens that Paul was visiting were more astute than most. They were sophisticated. They were rich in the arts and in religion and philosophy. They built temples to every religion they knew, the god of every religion they knew. They wanted to cover every base. And they even built a temple to the unknown God in case there was one they hadn't found out about yet. So Paul uses this as a way of having discourse with them. They must have heard about him because they let him come to the city council and have a conversation. And so Paul says, good for you having a temple to the unknown God, because that's the mystery that I worship. Let me tell you about the unknown God. He says any God can't be captured in physical material ways. Idols, all the different ways that we try to put our faith in things that have no power for us. Paul says, God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples made by human hands. Nor does God need anything we can supply for her, since it is she herself who gives life and breath and everything else to everyone. Paul says, while God is not definable and can't be controlled and can't be put in any image, God is present and is part of us and is a part of everything in the universe. We are all God's children, Paul says. What a revolutionary concept back in that time. I mean, it's revolutionary enough now with different religions still saying that they're the ones who have God's children. We're all God's children, Paul said, whatever our tribe. In God we live, move, and have our being. One of my favorite verses. We don't need a superhero God with special powers that can override the laws of nature, because let's face it, if the miracle stories in the Bible were factual instead of symbolic attention grabbers, they haven't done anything for you or me. They haven't done anything because we've never seen the physical laws of nature set aside. We don't see people being raised physically from the dead. Nobody's walking on water. Nobody's having their schizophrenia cured by prayer, faith healers, or gurus of any kind. I watched The Shack again. It's on Netflix. I'm watching more Netflix than I usually do. And it's a great movie in many ways. I enjoyed the movie more than the book. For those who don't know The Shack, it's a fascinating story about God working to help a hurt man work through his anger at God for letting his father beat his mother and for letting his daughter get kidnapped and murdered. I like the movie better than the book because the movie emphasizes more the idea of God with us, struggling alongside of us, working to heal and mitigate the damage done and bring redemption and new life out of evil and death. But the book and the movie can't let go of a God who has power over nature, able to walk on water, do as God likes, knows everything that's going to happen, knows what we're going to say. That God leaves me cold. It's no help to me facing life's unbearable burdens. That God is an idol, a parlor trick, a disappointment. Paul understands God as the creative, loving beingness that animates all of life and love in the universe. Not as some being apart from the universe. God isn't someone over us. God is with us. God is the system, not over the system. God is the universe, evolving it, moving it toward greater life, more complex life, greater diversity, greater relationships, greater human rights, greater kindness. Paul identifies the desire for relationship as essential to this mystery we call God. He says God created and is creating so that humanity will look for God and find her as they feel around for God. We all have that desire in us to be connected to the whole. We are all relational in our very essence. The universe is one intricate set of relationships. The universe is one organism, one being that we're all a part of, just as we Christians say that we're all a part of the body of Christ. The universe is the body of God. Every part connected and interacting with the other. This was the gift from the Jews who called God. They understood God was spirit and energy, mysteriously at work everywhere, denoting that God, or the other name they had for God, I am who I will be. And understanding that God, too, is evolving with the universe. You know, even science didn't believe in an evolving, growing universe until a Belgian priest by the name of George Lemaitre used Einstein's E equals mc squared to assert the Big Bang Theory and the growth of an expanding universe. Even though his equations were correct, even though Einstein couldn't believe it, until later an astronomer named Hubble proved it. Some of the ancients, though, had a sense of how we're all connected into one being, into one life force. In the first creation story, God does not create out of nothing, like I was taught. If you read it, it says, in the beginning, as God was creating the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was everywhere. An early insight into the Big Bang that takes chaos seriously and envisions God as the spirit that evolves order and life out of chaos. That's important. Because unless we embrace chaos, we'll always be thrown off stride when chaos slaps us in the face. When chaos hits us, we have to know that it's not that God has abandoned us. We have to know that chaos is a part of existence that God cannot eliminate, that God, like us, is working through to bring something new, to bring into harmony. The second creation story also points out that creation's difficult, and it envisions God down in the dirt creating a human being. And the Jewish faith saw that this ability for the universe to evolve and create life was a divine principle that can give us comfort and faith and hope. They also saw that our capacity to love and our need for relationship is the other great divine principle, and the core affirmation of our capacity to love and forgive. The Bible writers had God's first question in the Bible be a question of relationship. They picture God walking in the garden, say, Adam, where are you? I haven't seen you. I'm missing you. They understood that relationship is core to this mystery, this divine mystery we call God. And so we see that God is vulnerable to the pain that evil causes as we are vulnerable. God shared the pain of Jesus dying on the cross. God shares the pain of all who are hurt. Now that's a God I can get my head around and trust. A force that's subject to the same realities as you and me, experiencing chaos and pain, yet always seeking life and love and growth like we do. For we're a part of the divine mystery. No tricks or escape from reality are needed or possible. Life is eternal. Great miracles like forgiveness and awareness and redemption happen all the time. These are the real miracles, just like our ability to eat sunlight and soil and rainwater in the food that we take in. These are miracles we can trust our lives to. But there's one last miracle that Paul mentions that is core to what he experiences and history experiences as the divine presence. He observes that God is in the business of creating justice just as much as creating life and love. He says, God overlooked the times when we had not evolved enough to know right from wrong, but now commands all people to turn from their evil ways. For the whole world will be judged with justice by someone God has chosen. God has given proof to this by raising that one from death, referring of course, to Jesus. Paul's expressing his profound belief that in this world, nobody gets away with anything. It's not that God decides who should and shouldn't be punished. It's that everything that's destructive to life and love and meaning, the system breaks it down. The system will not let it grow. The system will not let it flourish. Paul made clear that God blesses love and overturns evil. To the extent that people do not live in the Jesus way of kindness, respect, and love, they'll suffer for it. Just as plants can't grow and flourish without sunlight, water, and minerals, so we can't grow and flourish without kindness, respect, and fairness. Cruel people are not happy people. Driven people with no empathy are not happy people. Greedy people are not happy people. And if there's one thing history teaches, it's that people with guns and money don't win in the end. The arc of history leans toward greater human rights. Thank God. We dare not leave our decision making up to others, because if we make decisions that are harmful to the universe, the immune system of the universe, which is my model of what the judgment of God is, the immune system of the universe breaks down everything physically and spiritually that's harmful to health. Karma is no respecter of persons. We sow what we reap. It may take some time to enjoy the crop, but we reap what we sow. The article on the anxious child highlights that the best thing we can do for our children is not to try and make their lives easier and take away their insecurities and anxieties, but to coach them through it. To acknowledge that test they're going to study is stressful. It is a challenge. But that they just have to do their best. And the results don't matter, because if they do their best and are kind, they're going to have great lives. Isn't that reassuring? Instead of competitive messages, oh, you've got to do it, you've got to do it. If you don't get the right mark, things aren't going to work out. You're not going to get a job. It just kills kids. And then the article from 2 months ago, the researchers point out, instead of a family of just a parent or two, we need community. It's the people who are part of big extended families that are all working together well. It's people who are in villages of spiritual communities that are kind and cultural communities that are kind. These are the families where the kids and the grandkids do better. Yes, that mysterious unknown force that's in us and a part of us. That's what we need to be telling our kids about, and connecting it to nature, connecting it to science, so that they see the whole universe is designed for love, is designed for greater relationship and complexity, and is designed for justice. What a difference it would make in our kids' lives if they grew up hearing that all the time and that reinforced. The whole universe is your friend. Ah, yes. We give thanks for that mysterious, unknown God that enables the universe to grow into more life, into more love, more justice for all, will enable us to weather the storms of chaos and evil together, will see us through as it saw our ancestors through. My friends, that's the good news. That's the gospel.